Sir, good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our regularly scheduled, actually this is a special meeting. We've scheduled our regular meeting from June 7th to May 31st. There are four of us here physically, and Catherine is, you will notice on FaceTime, she is, I believe, in Nevada.
No, she's in Michigan.
Michigan, even worse. And so anyway, she's not here, let's put it that way. So if we could, can we have a roll call, please?
Okay. Director Boyd?
Here.
Director Wilson?
Here.
Director Harvey?
Here.
Director Huber?
Here.
Catherine Slater-Cotter is participating via
And she's here via FaceTime. Okay, I want to welcome everyone here. I know we've got a full agenda tonight, and so I'll just say welcome. I'm glad you're here. And I will entertain oral comments on items that are not on the agenda. That means anything that's not on the agenda, if anyone wishes to speak to us on items not on the agenda. Yes, sir.
And I did fill out a card for this.
I'm sure you did.
I know.
Go ahead. Are you Greg?
No, I'm Vic Abity. But
I'm sorry.
Vic Abity, Montara.
Okay, got it, right here.
All right,
Okay.
garbage trucks. Those rascals are leaking a lot of oil on the ground, and it washes into the ocean. Now, I don't think that's very cool. The way I know about this, I live on 7th Street. I rent office space a block and a half down from the house, so I do a lot of walking on that part of 7th Street. Now, our garbage day is Friday. If the weather's dry, you'd never know about this, but when we've had a lot of fog water or rain that's dampened the street, you can see it's like this Hansel and Gretel trail of oil drops that generate oil sheen on the damp street. And I don't know if it's motor oil, hydraulic fluid, or what, but you know, I think a year or so ago, Clemens, did I call you? I called and talked to somebody and mentioned that. It might have been you. I don't remember.
Yeah, I do remember that I got a similar complaint, and there was apparently some liquid that was leaking out of the collected garbage. That's what I got from the ecology.
Oh, so it's coming out of the
Yes.
garbage bin part.
Right.
I'm
going to double check, of course.
immediately
Sorry,
skeptical. I'm a born cynic and skeptic, and so no, that's fine. That's who I am. But I mean, this is not an occasional, widely spaced drop. They're so close. They're almost a foot, half a foot in diameter, and they're so close they almost run together. So there's a lot of that going on. If you all would see if you can look into it. If it's a problem we can correct. I think it's a legitimate environmental issue.
Well,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think you have a commitment that we'll follow through with them.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, I understand there's a request to add an item to the agenda.
There he is.
And if that be the case, then I recommend action on that at this time to add the item to the agenda. And that will take a motion supported by at least 4 votes. And the item should be based on findings that first of all, that the item came to the attention of the district after the posting of the agenda, and second, that there's a need to take immediate action on the item.
Okay, and I believe the item that you're requesting to be put on the agenda tonight is to review possible action concerning the sewer mainline relocation and related agreement. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so based on council's advice, we need 4 of us to approve that to be added to the agenda. Can I have a motion?
I make the motion to add this to the agenda.
And a second, please. All in favor?
Aye.
You have.
And second, I would recommend a finding that the matter came to the attention after the posting of the district after posting the agenda, and that there is a need to take immediate action on the item. I understand in that regard that it relates to the urgency of completion of a project and the necessity for financing of the project with respect to the mainline relocation which is involved.
Yeah, so we have it on the agenda. What I'm gonna recommend is we process it after we have prepared it. Is there any reason why we can't do that?
Yes,
Okay, fair
that's
enough.
perfectly fine.
Okay, so we are going to have our first item of business is review and possible action concerning adoption of the maximum sewer service charges for fiscal year 2018, 2019, and 2019-20. So, here's what I'm gonna ask that, the process that we follow tonight. You will have a presentation from Clemens and the team. We are going to then ask any of you who wish to provide feedback to the board to do so, and any of you who wish to do so, again, I'm requesting that you fill out this blue form. I am going to ask that everyone keep their comments to 3 minutes, and I'm also going to ask if your feedback is the same as what you've heard before, just reinforce that, so that we can get through all of you. If you have questions, we're going to collect the questions and then allow staff to ask the questions in one group versus trying to have questions from person to person. If there are any other desire that we have to have further feedback from the audience, we will so ask for such. So that's the process I would like to do. Yes, ma'am.
On that first adding of the agenda item, I didn't hear you guys take a vote. Did you
Yes,
guys?
we did.
Oh,
We
okay,
did. It
no,
wasn't
unanimous.
unanimous.
Okay.
We did do that. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to turn this item over to Clemens and I'll let you do the presentation.
All right, thank you very much. So everybody's here for this item, I understand, which is, again, the action to concern the adoption of the maximum sewer service charges for the fiscal year 18-19 and 19-20. So this process is called the Prop 218 process, and Alex is going a little bit into the detail on what this means and how this works. But in short, any public agency who wants to establish rates has to go through this process that also was laid out in the notice that everybody received. And with that, we're establishing a maximum sewer service charge. We intend to set the rates at that for 18-19 and 19-20. So this whole process really started actually 1 year ago with the adoption of the sewer authority mid-coast sites last year's budget. I think we all understood and realized that rates have to go up. This was also reported in, for example, not only these meetings, but also the Half Moon Bay Review at the time. In November, it was, we then went to the board, actually asked for the initiation of a study, had initial discussions about this. Since then, we met several times. In March and April, 2 meetings, we then received draft presentations and draft rate studies that are prepared by our consultant, Bartle Wells. Alex Handless is here with Bartle Wells tonight. Those rate studies received input from the board and the public, and we then presented a final version, sent out the notice, and announced this public meeting tonight. So the last sewer rate study was really implemented quite some time ago. I'm taking a little bit away from what Alex, but that might cut down there as well. We were able to we established a Prop 218 limit that we thought that we need for 4 years. We were able to extend that rate increase over quite some time. I want to be clear that our infrastructure and operations costs always increase, but we've been very proactive throughout the past decade to actually ensure that we can handle our budget and infrastructure cost and do this with increases that mainly offset the cost of inflation. So we have, even though we increased our improvement projects, we literally doubled the amount of money that we put into the ground in the past 10 years. We understand that it is not enough and that we have to be more proactive. Our system is aging. What is also aging is the infrastructure of the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast site. We're a part owner of the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast site. We're going to call it SAM from now on. We own roughly 20% in SAM and have to pay more or less 20% of the capital and operations costs for the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side. The costs of the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side have increased significantly. We've seen last year a budget increase of 25%, this year an increase of 18%. And now we're being also under pressure through the state to implement some infrastructure upgrades. SAM has proposed now a plan of roughly $40 million. That's over 20 years. So that's a little bit the short version of what we need. I'm going to now hand this over to Alex, and he's going to give us a slideshow presentation going a bit more into detail. Before I hand this over and ask you two to maybe scoot a little bit to the side, staff recommendation for this item is to open the public hearing, allow for relevant testimony, close the public hearing, and adopt the ordinance of the Montara Water and Sanitary District establishing maximum sewer service charges for the fiscal years July 1, 2018 through June 30, 2019, and the following one. All right, let's see if we can get this to work.
Nice to see you, Dave.
So,
We might need to shut our window too. Sun beaming up. And I think folks have copies of the presentation. I know they were being passed around, but there's plenty of copies outside.
I don't
We could
have.
open them. Oh, there should be some right here.
It's the sun coming into the window.
This is really more of a summary presentation, kind of big picture stuff. I'm just going to start walking through. Anyway, my name's Alex Handlers. I'm a principal with the firm Bartle Wells and Associates. We've been working with the district for many years. We're an independent public finance consulting firm. We specialize in water and sewer rates and finance. We've worked for 500 agencies all around California. I've worked for many agencies here in the Bay Area as well. But next slide, just real quick background. Kind of the underpinning of this is that the district, the sewer utility, is a financially self-supporting. There's a tiny trickle of property taxes, but it's largely funded by sewer rate revenues. So at the end of the day, the sewer rate revenues need to be set at adequate levels. Am I loud enough? Okay, so at adequate levels to fund the ongoing operations of the district and Sewer Authority Mid-Coastline, which, as Clemens mentioned, we're going to call SAM, but also very importantly, the capital improvement needs. And that's really what's driving the need for rate increases for this round here. There's a lot of old facilities out there. The Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side has got a treatment plant that's over 40 years old in coastal conditions. It's in need of substantial rehabilitation. A lot of aging infrastructure needs to be replaced. I think folks know that. And as Clemens mentioned, the same situation with the district's local infrastructure, pump stations and pipelines that are also old. And despite the district, taking efforts over the last decade to step up funding, it's really not enough to address the needs of an aging system. Next slide. Clemens already mentioned the history. The last rate study was done about 8 years ago in 2010. It was a 4-year rate increase. The district has been able to phase that in over 8 years, so that we haven't been back here with sewer rate increases in 8 years. And when we look historically over the last decade, it's been mostly inflationary, small rate increases most years. Other things that have impacted the district's sewer enterprise revenues include the drought. People cut back water use here and many other communities. Folks here did an admirable job reducing water use not only in the summer but also in the winter. So that's kind of cut down the volume of sewer sales that leads to the revenues for the district. So we're seeing, when you look over the last decade, a lot of folks now are paying, you know, the same or less than they did in inflation-adjusted terms about 10 years ago. And when we compare your rates to other communities out there, on the next slide, we'll see that your rates are actually, for a typical homeowner, in the middle of the pack, slightly higher than the median out there. But on the next slide, a lot of these other agencies are substantially larger agencies. They're not all on the coast. A lot of them have large commercial and/or industrial sectors. And I work for a number of these agencies. I can tell you firsthand, many of them are going through the same challenges that this district is, with the need for infrastructure improvements. There's a lot of old wastewater treatment plants that were put in 40-plus years ago that need to be rebuilt. San Mateo's looking at, you know, 800 million of projects. Redwood City's looking at hundreds of millions. They've got a regional treatment plant that needs to be rebuilt as well. Millbrae recently did some big rate increases. San Carlos, I won't go into it, but many of these agencies are in the midst of multi-year rate increases, largely due to increasing infrastructure needs. Moving on to the next slide.
Can I ask you a question about that?
I will defer to the board.
So what I'm gonna do, we're gonna hold questions to the public hearing, and then I'm gonna collect the questions, and then we'll have the opportunity to respond to them. Go ahead.
So, I mean, really, what are the key reasons driving the rates here? It's been emphasized a few times already. It's really old infrastructure, both at the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side. I'll point out their wastewater treatment plant was largely grant-funded, so folks never actually had to pay for the treatment plant in the first place, but a lot of these facilities are hitting the end of their useful life. Clemens already talked about the operational cost increases at the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side as well. And obviously, there's just cost inflation in all things, whether it's electricity or healthcare benefits, things like that. Small rate increases are needed as a baseline just to kind of spin the wheels and keep the revenues in line with the cost of service. So altogether, it leads into the next slide. What we did to evaluate the rate increases, we developed some 10-year cash flow projections. And we looked at different alternatives, and we didn't just come up with one approach. We looked at what if you did a one-time rate increase to really shore up the finances and fund what you should be funding, which are kind of the long-term costs of service. Obviously, no one wanted to go down that path. We also looked at a second scenario, a phased approach. What if we phased rate increases in over 3 to 5 years? There needs to be a little bit of front loading because things are a little bit behind right now. And then what's ultimately being recommended is even a third approach, which is a slightly reduced rate increases. So it's what we're calling a reduced phase-in approach. It's a little bit slower phase-in of rate increases. We acknowledge these are significant rate increases, so they are going to put a financial burden on folks, particularly folks on fixed income. The rates are designed to reflect the cost of service, and what was coming out of the whole process working with the board is not a desire necessarily to do 5 years of rate increases and try to solve everything. Obviously, no one has a crystal ball what's going to be happening in the future. We do know kind of the magnitude of the capital programs out there and the operating programs, but of course, things are always subject to change a little bit. So we looked long-term, we aimed the rates in the right direction, and what's being proposed at this time is the first 2 years of rate increases. Yes, the rate increases are a little bit front-loaded. These are substantial steps in the right direction, and we imagine that the district is going to reevaluate in future years, just as they've done in prior rate increases. Next slide shows what the proposed rates are, and everyone should have received this. There were notices mailed out over 45 days ago to all property owners, so everyone should have received these notices and information of what the rates are. And you can see here, the district, I want to just talk briefly about the rates, make sure everyone understands how they work. The district has a number of different customer classes. Most of the customer base is residential. The rates for residential customers are based on winter water use with a minimum of 4 units per month. Rates are expressed as a rate per 100 cubic feet. 100 cubic feet is about 750 gallons. So We see on the top left there, the current rate of $14.31 per 100 cubic feet equals a rate of a little less than $2 per 100 gallons, or a little less than 2 cents per gallon. But it's increasing substantially over the next 2 years to a rate of $21 per 100 cubic feet, which is, $3 per 100 gallons, or a little less than 3 cents per gallon. If you were to look at the district's current rate ordinance, it's a little bit confusing because the rates are shown per a 4-month winter period, so the rates expressed in the ordinance now are actually $42 a month, but we're putting everything kind of in, we think it's a much easier way to understand it. It's $14.31 based on annualized monthly use. There's a number of commercial classes out there. There's not a lot of commercial customers, but their rates are based on average monthly use throughout the entire year, not just the winter period. The reason residential rates are based on the winter is because that's when there's minimal outdoor irrigation. So that's what most agencies use, who use volumetric rates. But the commercial rates are based on wastewater strength. Obviously, higher strength customers like restaurants are putting more contaminants into the system, hence they pay a higher rate. But the rates are designed that everyone's paying their fair share of costs at the end of the day. But it's hard to know, just looking at the rates, what that means. If you go to the next slide, we have just a summary of what the dollar impacts are for residential customers at different levels of use. The district does have a minimum charge based on 400 cubic feet, and actually 50% of bills are at that level. The current charge works out to be about $57 a month. It would go up to $84 a month. So that's a significant increase. The typical bill is the next one I've highlighted in yellow. About 2/3 of the bills are at or below this level of 5 units of monthly winter water use. The current rate's about $71 per month, what it equates to, and it's going up to a little over 100, which is a bit higher, but again, we're already seeing a lot of other agencies broaching these other levels. Here in Montara, folks don't pay monthly bills. It's an annual charge that's put on the property tax rolls, so it's the property owners that are paying these charges. And you can see what the annual charges are below. Moving on to the next slide.
Could you go back to that one?
Yeah.
And everyone should have that in the handouts as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And it really depends on what the usage is. And again, we've seen a lot of folks cut back usage here in the district with the drought, which helps not only for the conservation efforts, but also has helped folks offset some of the rate increases that have happened in water and sewer over the last 4 or 5 years. Looking longer term, this is showing what a typical bill is going back to 2008-9, so about 11 years ago. With the proposed rate increases here, we know from this point forward there are significant rate increases over the next couple of years. But to put it in context, going back a few years ago, people used to use more water. People used to have higher winter water usage. The average used to be about 6 units per month. Now we're down to 5 as a typical bill. And we look at the bill going back to 2008-9 was about $60. If you were to compound that and figure out what's the annual compounded rate of increase over that 10-11 year period, with these rate increases, the typical bill's going up at about 5.5% per year. Had the bill been going up at 5.5% a year every year for the last 11 years, it doesn't make it any more palatable, folks. We understand that, but it just does put it in context because costs have been rising. Again, both here and at the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side, and the district is taking on more and more infrastructure needs. So, just to conclude, these are just 2 years of rate increases. It's very likely, very possible, additional rate increases are going to be needed down the line. I know the district's received a number of letters and comments saying, hey, you don't have perfect information about the future. How can you do any rate increases? And to that I say, I've never had perfect information for over 100 agencies we worked with, but we did use the best information we can. We have a good sense of what the infrastructure needs are going forward. We're trying to phase it in, and we're only taking the first 2 steps along the path at this stage of the game. The next slide, I think Clemens, you already mentioned, this is not the beginning of the process. This was not a rush process. This has been going on for a while. We've had a couple of board meetings where we've talked about this in detail, and I recognize there have been some of the folks in this room who have been to some of those board meetings. Everyone, again, should have received their 218 notice over 45 days ago. And what's being proposed, again, as the district's done in the past, these are the maximum rates allowable that the district would be allowed to implement. The district always has the authority to review these rates each year and implement something less. Again, last time they did a rate increase, they stretched it from 4 years over to 8 years. I don't think that's going to be possible this time, from what we've heard from the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side and what their needs are and what the district's needs are. But the goal is to get the new rates in effect. You've got a fiscal year. The rates need to go on the property tax rolls sometime in July for collection the upcoming year. So with that, I think I'm just going to leave it there and turn it over to the board and the public.
So I hereby will open the public hearing on the proposed rate increase that's been prescribed on the agenda. And I will now open this up for public comment. And again, if those of you who have not given me the blue slip, please do so if you wish to present to the board. And beg your forgiveness if I do not pronounce your name correctly, but I have first is Greg.
Hey, Dwight?
Yes, sir.
Could I suggest you let JQ go first, because he has the most relevant observation?
I'm open. Go ahead. And again, please remember our time limits as well.
And for questions on a clarification on that.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna accumulate the questions, and as part of the public hearing, then I will have the staff and Clemens respond in total.
Can we have the lights on again?
We can do that.
What do we write our questions on?
You can write the questions on the blue slip if you wish. That would be helpful. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is J.Q. Oswine. I'm a Moss Beach resident. We had previously, I'm also a board member of Resist Density. Resist Density had previously submitted a statement about this rate increase, but today I'm speaking on my own behalf as a private citizen. I have some comments and requests, but also have some questions, which I'll turn in when I'm done. The proposed significant increases in sewer rates and their sudden implementation place a significant burden on many coastside residents with little time to understand the increases and apparently no reasonable recourse in stopping them. According to Proposition 218, and I quote, "Each assessment notice must contain a mail-in ballot for the property owner to indicate his or her approval or disapproval of the assessment. The requirement that at least half of property owners object by May 31st, today, to stop these increases could not be feasibly achieved in the allotted time, as MWSD did not provide the required mail-in ballot, nor did they provide enough information to allow property owners to make a determination of support or opposition. Although Prop 218 does not specify the type or extent of information that must be provided, it is only prudent that MWSD provide property owners detailed information in advance and allow them sufficient time to understand the reasons for these increases in order to formulate well-informed opinions about them. Overall, MWSD's process for the rate increase decision did not provide sufficient transparency to allow for appropriate community involvement or opposition. In addition, the agenda for tonight's meeting recommends that the ordinance to approve these increases is to be adopted tonight, suggesting that it will be done regardless of community input. So I'd like to make a request. On behalf of the community, I respectfully request the following from the MWSD directors. Number one, please delay considering the ordinance tonight. Number two, please schedule a community meeting as soon as possible that is dedicated to thoroughly presenting the rationale for these increases and answering any questions at a large venue such as Fairlawn View Elementary School. This will allow for greater attendance, better transparency into the board's rationale, better community engagement in the process, and greater community involvement in the final decision. And number three, please allow 60 days from that meeting for the community to provide additional written input, and MWSD should also provide a mail-in ballot for property owners to approve or reject the proposed increases. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will now go in order. Greg, for you. Okay, thanks.
Greg Diegas, Montara, members of the board and fellow residents. I'm one of the residents who protested the sewer rate increase. I introduce into evidence, he said, hopefully, an updated copy of the letter you previously received with a 6th recommendation attached. The recommendations are for governance that I think is appropriate for a matter of this complexity. My core objection is not the reality of our crumbling infrastructure, which is a national problem, nor is it the good efforts and intentions of the Montara Water and Sanitary District Management and Board. My core objection is that the rate increase was not accompanied by disclosures in the public notice which show ratepayers the extent of difficulties in the aging infrastructure, the expected degree of future rate increases. You may remember from the board minutes the table of 5 years with percentages that compound to over 200%. That was not disclosed. Only the first 2 years were mentioned. The $1 million fines we risk annually, and you're aware of that fine of $500,000, which could have been by statute $3.5 million for the overflow. And also was not disclosed the litigation by Half Moon Bay and the ramifications of that litigation in legal fees, extra operating expenses, and the potential for an even higher share of overflow fines in the future. Further, the homework done by SAM, and presumably our agency as well, is not accompanied by financials which properly tie the capital improvements to financial statements. Those were cash flow projections. For example, every SAM asset has an existing book value, depreciation, operating cost, maintenance requirements. And when it is upgraded or replaced by another asset, there's a new book value, a new depreciation, new useful life, new operating expenses, et cetera. None of that information was in the SAM detail. I went back to the 5-year original study, and on their individual capital project sheets, they don't show the financials, except for the outlay. So my concern is that these new values need to replace the older values in the future financial statements, and those statements have to underpin the rate increase you're desiring. I haven't seen anywhere financials planned for SAM or any of the other member agencies, and I looked, which tie the planned capital expenditures and thus support the new rate increase calculations. Overall, however, there's no doubt that more funds or a new approach is needed for our sewers. Revenues have been unable to keep pace with the necessary maintenance and replacement, or we wouldn't be where we are here today. I ask you to look into the charges made for new connections and whether they contribute to the capital infrastructure that already exists and which underpins their joining. Clearly, usage fees being charged has not been enough to keep up with the capital burden. So I ask you to consider a full cost accounting for new connections that includes the capital already in place that has been paid for by ratepayers for decades. Further, I have seen no consideration of strategic alternatives for our district other than patch what we have. Other board members have expressed concern in the May 3rd meeting, and you know who you are. But it's unsurprising that SAM would come up with a plan to replace itself. So to create alternatives, the board and the staff, I think, could use some help. And I volunteer, and I'm sure there's several other people in the audience and ratepayers with engineering and financial backgrounds who could be of use in preparing and auditing a study of sewer system alternatives and their costs, including new technologies, locations, and ownership structures and financing. And finally, we're all in this together, and I'm here to help, in part to prevent overloading a staff and a board that have a full plate. We might even save some consulting revenues. And in part because I believe there are useful additional talents and perspectives in the community which could improve the decision-making. You have a list of recommendations which I would like to see adopted, and after which we can have a rate increase based on more visible facts and concrete alternatives. And I thank you. I wait your reply.
Thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate your comment. Ann Rothman. Ann Rothman.
My concern, obviously, with the rate increase, when you presented and said, well, you're only in the middle of the pack, we're actually the most expensive of anyone on the coast. If you look at Half Moon Bay, if you look at El Granada, if you even look at Pacifica, which is far greater size than us, they all pay less than us than what you're proposing.
Much less.
much less. El Granada is not even a third, and that's really not right to have us foot the bill. Second of all, I'm very concerned that you're asking us to make these improvements so that you can add on the major projects that you have in the pipeline here, which is the affordable housing that you plan on putting across the street, which is now going to have more than potentially 300, I believe, 50 plus new residents that's going to be connected, and you're asking us to foot the bill for them, and so on down the road. And you have other projects. Perhaps you're saying, I see you say no, but I don't understand, you know, where these rates are coming from. And I've been here more than 25 years. I've been here for the purchase of this when we had the other company, and we were promised that our rates would go down. And we were promised that we weren't going to keep having to foot these terrible bills. Well, the truth is we paid far more by purchasing this than we ever probably would have had we just stayed with the company who originally had the water system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vic? Aberdeen?
Vic Abadi, Montara. I oppose the sewer rate increase. It's too big. Let me back up a minute. Dwight, thank you very much for putting this ahead of the other agenda items. That was really considerate of you. You get a gold star. You know, on the bulletin board up there at the head of it.
Make sure I get that started.
Okay, all right. Anyway, I oppose the rate increase. It's too big. You know, there's two basic ways to balance your dollars. You increase income, or you reduce costs, or both. Here, one thing you need to do is to look at reducing costs. Now, that's tough. Clemens and others of you have made cases for the need for capital improvements. I believe that. Many years ago, I consulted to the water side of the district. That brought me up close to the board and the field staff and the general manager, and I'm here to tell you, everybody does a good job. Everybody's committed. I know that. But instead of just coming to us for more income, you really need to look at reducing costs. That's very tough. There are always some ways to reduce costs. It may not be much fun. Look at capital costs. You have to look at expenses, and that would also include payroll and benefits. Tough decisions. We elected you board members to make tough decisions. You represent the community. That's why we elected you. I think you take seriously your duty to represent us, and those of you that I've known many years personally, I know that you do. I can't see my notes. Oh.
We won't take personally that you shut us out of the light here.
It was an accident. But once again, Clemens has proven his worth. He is a good manager, I know that. So, you board members represent us. I think you take seriously your duty to represent us. To represent us, you have to listen. The community, you have to listen to the community. Listening would reveal that the community opposes this rate increase. We do. I've discussed it with a lot of people. I mean, here lately while this is happening. Nearly 100% of the people I talk to oppose it. Most of them were unaware of it despite the public notice. Now, in my opinion, here's how you can show that you listen. Well, I mean, you could not increase the rates, but I know you need some money. We need some money. But you can demonstrate listening and representation this way. And someone already suggested this. Table this thing for now. delay it, give the community more time to give you more input, more of the written protest forms could come in. As I said, almost everybody I've talked to around town lately, even though you sent out the notifications, was unaware of this. I think it would be a nice gesture for you to allow more time to bring in more signatures. Now, you did give proper legal notice. That's not the point. The point is, do you board members really represent ratepayers and voters? And in representing us, do you really want to know what we think about the increase? If you do, table this thing for at least another month or two. Refusing to delay, to listen to the community, creates the appearance of high-handed rejection of the ratepayers and the voters. Rejection of those of us who pay the district's bills and elect the board. High-handed rejection of ratepayers and voters. I don't think you all want to create that image. I don't want to see you create that image. But if you bulldoze ahead with this thing tonight, that's what you're going to do, is create that kind of an image. In summary, I, along with nearly all ratepayers who expressed opinions to me on the rate increase, oppose it. The increase is too large. Look at reducing costs so that you can get by with a smaller rate increase. Delay taking action so as to allow more time to listen to the community, more signatures to come in. Yeah, I can stop there.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, gentlemen. Catherine, thank you. Oh, she fell asleep. Oh.
All right. Carol Ann? You?
Carlisle.
Carlisle,
Oh, I'm sorry. Definitely not Carol.
No, I was having trouble here. My apologies for that.
All right, let me wait till these guys leave.
Yeah, go ahead. Take off.
Carlisle and Young Moss Beach. I'm in Seal Cove. I'll just start with, I have a few things to say, but one of them was on the Bartles and Wells presentation. I couldn't really see what is the new rate I'll be paying, and why was there really no billing rate breakdown. I printed out my tax bill, and there's only 2 charges on it from Montara Water and Sanitary District, and it did say that they were, it looks like I'm paying the minimum charge. I'm a household of 1, so, except my goats, 686.88, but you're breaking it down on your form here by HCFs, and it doesn't ever tell us on our tax bill how many HCFs we're using in a year. And so,
It does say that it's the minimum.
yeah, he just said that was the minimum. It doesn't say it on your tax bill. We never get an invoice billing. So to me, it was like, well, where are they pulling these numbers from? I didn't understand it, and I think had the initial notice gone out saying what the annual charges would be, you might have a little more clarity to people who get tons of requests from all kinds of special districts like CUSD, et cetera, asking for more money every year. And it does seem like you've projected on your notice that my minimum charge would go up to $835.68 for this 2018-2019 and $1,011.36 by the next billing cycle, if you use the accelerated rate plan. I personally am more in favor if you're in a big hurry to rush it through tonight so you can get it on the July property tax bill notices that come out later in the fall. I know there's a county cutoff for that, which is probably why you're rushing it through. But, I saw on your projections that there was a rate increase that could possibly be more steady and not bumped up in the beginning. Then on your page for the need for rate increases, and you say key factors driving the need for rate increases, you don't give any percentages. So, you say SAM infrastructure is in need of major reinvestment due to age and condition. Well, what percentage of the proposed rate increase is just for SAM and their deferred maintenance? And then their operating expenses, is it all because of extra labor, or is there some other kind of operating expenses that we have no knowledge of? I realize they've had a lot of different managers over there. And then it says aging MWSD sewer collection system in need of rehab and replacement. I'm not sure, do we have to ask Sam to pay that, or are we always fix our own up here by our own means? That wasn't given a percentage either. So, is Sam like 75% and the aging MWSD is getting 15%? Or, that's where I really, really prefer to see a breakdown, because I don't really see it here. And yes, I understand that small annual rate increases are needed to keep up with the cost of inflation. That's to be expected. So I am definitely in favor more of a reduced phased-in approach, if that was the case. Let's see if I had some other questions here. Let's see, and I think you said it was going to be a $2.5 million ask. And that's for everything, right? The MWSD and the SAM combined. Is that just simply a patch, or are they going to come back again for more over and over, just like the Cabrillo Unified School District seems to do? They always say that we have leaking roofs, and then they only patch them instead of replace them. So I might be in favor of something, knowing that they're going to put a stop to all the hands out on the next sewer bill increase. So I thought Vic had good points. So I was just wondering how much of the increase and the percentages of the key factors are the newly, approved benefit package. Is that plan sustainable? Because I haven't been to many meetings lately, so I haven't really kept track of whether or not the proposed new benefit plan for our employees in this district have been keeping up with what was projected when they first announced they were going to give better benefit package. And if we're in the red there, I think it's wise to let us know that's part of what the new improvements are going towards, or operating expense, excuse me. I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
That was it.
Do we have windows here? Because I know it's getting warm in here. What if we could I think we could open up the ones where we have to just push those up a bit, get the circulation in here. And with that, Steve Holman. Steve? Oh,
Steve Homeland, Montara for 30 years. First want to thank the board for their service. I would say I'm neutral. I think the magnitude of the proposed increase got my attention, so perhaps a side benefit is I looked at my property tax bill more closely than I ever have. Figured out what 1% over 30 years actually does to the main property tax bill. Realized that CUSD is going for a third line item this year. So remembered that we're in the highest tax state, one of the highest tax states in the country. But as my home is my main asset, so I know we need to maintain the infrastructure. I'm not opposed to that at all. But I think, like many, there just wasn't enough detail. If I could, I may be wrong, but the sample calculation in the letter uses a rate of 1755, which I could not find anywhere in the table. I suspect it's a typo, but for people already unfamiliar with how rates are calculated, and I'll second the observation that the property tax bill gives you no detail. You actually, now I know, have to go and correlate with your water bills from 4 months, which could be November to February or December to March. The average citizen doesn't know how to do that. So a little more detail would be helpful. I've got a number of questions, some of which are getting answered. Just one observation, main question. When the recology rates went up, I was mad for about 2 days, and then I switched from a 64-gallon thing to a 32 and cut my bill in half. And I'm happy. I recycle a little more. Maybe that's the behavior that was targeted with the recology increase. But in the back of my mind, I thought, guess what? Revenues are going down because I'm conserving. And so a main question I have is, will a substantial increase, all I got to do is suck it up for 4 months. I can do that. I don't think your costs, the costs you're talking about are variable. I think they're fixed. So if you throw the costs way up, I'm going to conserve. You're going to get less money. So that's kind of a main question I have, is that, how do you model conservation into your revenue projections? Because it's sort of a Laffer curve, if you will, for your sewer district. Okay, thanks very much. Again, appreciate your service.
Thank you very much for coming. Christine Cooley, did I get that?
Yeah, hi. My name is Christine Cowdery, and my husband and I live in Moss Beach. Oh, sorry, it's Cowdery. I have terrible handwriting. Cowdery. And we've been here for about 8 years, and we've just been paying our water bill, not really paying attention. But this rate increase really got our attention, and we oppose it just because we don't have enough information, and also because we think it's going to be a hardship. We can pay it, but a lot of our neighbors who are like elderly, it's really going to be a hardship for them. So anyway, and also I just wanted to make a comment. So during your presentation, you said that basically this is a totally, customer like rate supported system. And I'm just wondering like where the grant funding is in this equation, because I mean, if you look at government like Caltrans or like any cities, I mean, there's no huge projects that don't have government funding. I mean, basically, you can't expect like all of us to pay for these like massive overhauls. I mean, there's tons of programs out there that we should be tapping into, and that other, water districts are tapping into. And so I encourage you to slow down, if you haven't already, do some research. I mean, I'm guessing that your consulting firm probably specializes in finding funding for sewer districts. So it like millions of dollars in funding. I mean, that's what these programs are there for. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And the last one I have is James, and again, I'm having trouble reading this, Coulter.
James Cowdery.
Cowdery, thank you.
Yeah. So my name's James Cowdery. I'm Christine's husband. So she mentioned. So some quick points. A lot of these have been made before, but I want to repeat them just for emphasis. I think the declining revenues on a 50% increase, that's a big factor. There hasn't been any mention of it, and I think it just indicates that the process is being rushed. Just, small things like that just, there's no evidence that that's really been analysed. I mean, you're just looking at the graph, I think, and putting us in the middle and seeing where we're going to be after the 50% and the company that we're going to be with, which looks like Hillsborough, Millbrae, and Burlingame. It doesn't make any sense when you look at the districts that are similar, which I know has been said before. The lack of public disclosure, with a 50% increase, you should have a riot here. I mean, the fact that you've got so few people, I think, and based on the few people we've talked to, people just don't know. So I would plead, as others have, slow down, take a couple of months and make sure that everybody knows about it. If it's a small thing, you can get away with a small notice. When there's a big thing happening, you need to shout it from the rooftops, and I don't think that's happened. On the accounting, really, lack of accounting. I mean, any company department is asking for this kind of money should provide a full budget. And they should be explaining exactly where all the money is going. And I didn't really see that in the materials that were provided today. And I think a full budgetary presentation needs to be given for those of us that are not up to speed with the budget of the water district. Okay, thank you very much.
Anybody
Excellent.
else who wants to present it in this particular hearing, public hearing? That's all the good cards I have. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, as promised, I'm gonna turn this back over to the staff. There was an accumulation of questions and that I'd like response from, either in writing or that was presented orally. So Clemens, I'll turn that back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dwight.
Dave, on this process, should I close the public hearing for new questions, or can we keep it open for questions?
I think you could allow for some response to.
That would be my bias.
Right,
So what I'm
so
saying
the
is-
public hearing should continue.
Yes. Okay, so we will keep the public hearing open and turn this back over to the staff.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is actually really great for us to get feedback and to hear from the community, what your concerns are. I wanted to particularly thank actually the three customers that approached me before. Just for everybody who's here, I want to encourage you to contact us. We're a small agency in a small district. We're approachable. That the advantage is that you can have actually the one-on-one discussion with us, and I'm certain we can arrange for a discussion with the director, because I've heard a lot of suggestions on in which direction to go. I heard some questions, but I heard a lot of suggestions for directions. So please hear that this is always available for us. I'm going to try to address some of these questions, and not going to go in a particular order, except the ones that is easiest for me to address. So first of all, I wanted to, I think Anne had some questions about cost. Why, if you compare the cost from the ultimately sewer cost from this agency to other agencies, why are we higher? Well, first of all, if we're looking at at some other areas, we're clearly not. There's clearly a lot of agencies that are much higher, have much higher rates than this district. The reason why, if you look at the other SAM member agencies and compare rates within the SAM member agencies, is that it's really an apples to oranges comparison. For example, Granada is heavily subsidized by property taxes. So there is less of a need to fund through rates. The second is there is simply way less infrastructure needs, and that is now true for Granada and Half Moon Bay and many other agencies in the Bay Area and in California. This district has a very rural setup, has a very challenging geography. We have to pump the sewage from the back side of Montara over to the front, and we have to relay that several times. So what's really expensive in this district is the pumping. The pumping is done by 13 major pump stations. I know Granada has, one pump station. I think the city has 3 pump stations. So if you, for example, compare the ratio of miles per pump station with San Francisco, then ours is by the factor of 200 plus. So we have an extremely expensive system to maintain because of the geography that we're in. Then you stated that this is paying for affordable housing. It is, I'm going to simply say, no, it's absolutely not, clearly not. Any project, if affordable housing or private residences have to pay for all increases, so any project has to do that for any improvements, system improvements, or for the capacity that they're taking. So there is absolutely no relationship between this rate increase and any of the projects that are out here on the coast. You also were talking about the purchase of the water system. I'm not quite sure how to relate this to this process because water rates and sewer rates are completely separate. Vic, I've heard a lot of good suggestions that can be discussed with the board. Before I know you have a written question. You actually said there is a way to either increase the income or reduce the cost. I want to encourage you to understand that we're paying for two agencies. I can guarantee you that we're keeping the cost in check here, absolutely. So please ask the question also, to others. I think there's a lot that we have really under control here. And I can guarantee you that, we're doing a very good job. Not saying that there's room for improvement. This is a process that needs to happen throughout the year, throughout the budgeting, et cetera, right? So we're happy to receive comments there. Now, you did have a question, Dave. You did have a question that I think we would want, hold on, where is it? You essentially had the question if the public can review the notices. And Dave, maybe if you can speak to this, because I mentioned earlier that, there is actually private information on the notices.
That would allow members of the public to ascertain the users, utility users of the district. And the statute provides that those are not public records. So the review of the protests, which identify the parcels involved, essentially would be contrary to the statute. It provides omission or exclusion of utility users' records from the public.
I'm a little confused by the question because my understanding of the question had to do with the, when we get our tax bills at the end of the year, there's really no way to understand how those charges are driven by the tax bill. So I guess the question is there a possibility that there could be a way that people would understand how those tax bills are derived in a way that's sent it to the customer versus the tax bill that we see at the end of the year? That was my understanding.
Yes, that can be derived by.
It was a separate question.
May I clarify
please.
what motivated my question? I was just thinking in terms of these protest forms come in, somebody in the district is going to count them. I was just wondering, can somebody from the public come in and verify the count? That's really all I was thinking. So that, nothing nefarious there.
Fair enough.
Okay, anyway, thank you for the answer.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So then Sid actually mentioned the county deadline, and I think that was a good comment. So since we collect the rates on the through the San Mateo County property tax collection offices, there's a deadline, and that deadline is approaching. So this process, the Prop 218 process, is always set up to accommodate for that. So it's not set up, for a second round. So if this process would fail, we would fail to get this increase in for 18-19 or any other increase in for 18-19. That deadline is July 30. Now, in reality for us, it's a little bit earlier than that because we have to transfer the information and county has to review and we have to confirm again. So there is, clearly a 2 week before that deadline for us. So by beginning July, we usually set the sewer rates and transfer them to the county. I also heard you were saying, is there a better way to finance, and I think to finance some of the projects. That's what I heard you say, and I think also I heard someone else say the same question, and that was about grant funding. So before I hand this to, I want Pippin, we have our sewer engineer here, I want to have him address this. But of course, we're always looking at grant funding. It is relatively difficult to achieve grant funding. A lot of the funds, particularly state funds, are specifically geared towards larger agencies. We're making use of grant funding on the water side, state loans, etc. So we are well versed in the process and always look out for grants.
Do you
So,
know what percentage of your revenue comes from grant funding?
so I mean,
Like for this
Yeah,
fiscal year,
I'm not
maybe
quite-
last fiscal year?
well, I'm not quite sure how I should understand the question of revenue, because all of this has to be, of course, paid back, right? So this is a way to pre-finance, for example,
No,
state loans.
She's asking for grants. not
Grants,
zero.
grants right now, zero.
Zero.
Yes. Pippin, can you, oh,
Oh, can I chime in one thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, grants are hard to come by. There's a lot of agencies go for them, and there's very little money. It's a very competitive
I'm a
process.
fundraiser, I
Oh.
do government grant fundraising, so yeah,
Oh,
I
but-
know it's difficult, but
but
it's not
what-
impossible.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
one thing they have pursued and been successful in obtaining are subsidized loan and subsidized financing programs, which, instead of an interest rate being 5%, they get a reduced interest rate. So I think you have a state revolving fund loan, which is,
Right.
half the state, so that equals about a 25% grant funding in some of the water projects. You've gotten some subsidized funding from California Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank. So it's not just, money given to you, it's that you have a reduced payment stream over time, and that's just built into, with reduced debt service, mostly on the water side, I think. I'm not sure on the wastewater side. So it's not always a dollar coming in, it means less going out over time.
And we have successfully obtained sewer grant funding in the past. The Clean Beaches Fund has helped us on, I think most recently was on the pilot program for
Right.
recycled water.
yes.
So we have some people who are very good at getting us in there, but the past few years there hasn't been a lot, and it's been very tough sledding to try to get up on the list to where it gets granted, so. Yeah, but we actually have, I think, a better track record, any agency on the coast side for obtaining grant funding. It's just, there's only so much of it that an agency this size can get.
I mean, did your consulting, like when you were putting together the business plan for this kind of expansion, did it include some kind of a thorough research of all the grant funding opportunities?
What we're, could I?
Go ahead.
Yeah, what we're doing tonight is talking about rate setting. What we're
Right.
not doing tonight is the particulars of any given project that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And with every project that we do, we look for what's the most beneficial way to get this funded. So it's not until we're actually doing those things that it's appropriate to go out and say, okay, this might qualify for this grant or that state
It just
revolving
seems
fund.
like you're expecting the ratepayers to kind of subsidize capital, like infrastructure
That's
projects.
correct, yes.
Yeah,
Okay, I want
It's
to,
still the percentages.
so I'm going to
versus
bring this back in.
Yeah.
We've got the question on the grant funding.
Yeah.
Point taken. And then, so why don't you finish on the question, then we'll send it to you two for further comment.
In fact, I'd love to talk to you offline at length about this. I would really love to.
Okay, so I think I want to hand it just really briefly to Pippin. So Pippin, grant funding.
Okay, I'll comment on that. I want to comment on one perspective to just clarify a question that she just raised. I don't think that the perception of the public here, every member here in the community subsidizing is the right word. Every member here owns this infrastructure. It's part of, this is a public entity that belongs to this community. So this, the ownership and the maintenance of it is a long-term commitment of this agency. And in order to do that, as Scott very clearly pointed out, we have to develop, it's the responsibility of the agency and the consultants that are asked by the agency to develop a plan of solvency and stability, assuming, we have to assume that we cannot get the grant funding. And they have the maximum rate of able. If for some reason we get a fantastic opportunity, a Clean Beaches grant, which we've done several of them in the past on projects, for example, on a recycled water grant, is able to bring those costs down. Each year, the board can reevaluate those rates, and they have the ability, as you saw in that one graph, to actually potentially keep those rates flat or even drop them in the future years based on project-specific revenues that might be able to be borrowed, or if it isn't a grant, as was also commented, a low-interest loan that could potentially fund a larger project sooner, but that interest has to be paid back, and you want to be careful to not be paying double over time for that interest when you could be paying it as you go. So it's a balance, it's an evaluation we do on every project, as was mentioned by Scott there on the board. So I think the due diligence with the rates from our perspective, understanding capital, as we look at assuming we can't not get a grant, we need to make sure that the minimum requirements to meet the state, permits and the operational expenses and the due diligence to keep the infrastructure repaired in a timely manner is how we approach it.
Thanks, Pippin. So, Christine, you had another comment that I just want to briefly touch on. That was the elderly's on fixed income. This is something that we, since we have some experience setting rates, so we run into this every time we set rates, because this community has a high percentage of, house rich, income poor folks. So this is really something that we hear and listen to very carefully. There is, of course, always the flip side, and that is, if you defer the maintenance further, you're gonna leave this all up to your children, ultimately. We're at a point, we have not mentioned, we've briefly mentioned that we are actually at a point where the SAM infrastructure failed catastrophically, and we are subject to large fines. We're subject to increased scrutiny, and we're under the close observation of the state at this point, and we simply can't afford to defer any further at this time. Okay, so this is really, I think, something that we receive a lot of pressure from higher up to take care of the infrastructure along the coast side, really. It is, I mean, please, I know everybody who's out here understands how precious the nature out here is in the Marine Reserve, and this needs to be protected. And that's also very important for the state. Steve had a very good point, and that is the relationship between increasing rates and the following reduction in usage. And I'd like actually Alex to talk about this, because this was a little bit about, is this going into the rate study? And I can tell you yes, of course. But Alex, tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, I'm going to just say, just to a very small degree, you're right, as the notion, it was like, the Laffer curve, by the way, has been debunked many times. You raise taxes, you're going to lose tax revenues. But what is legitimate is this notion of elasticity. You raise water rates, and there's more incentive for people to cut back. And in fact, and that's happened with many agencies, and there's been studies done all throughout this area showing, for example, for every 10% increase in water rates, it's approximately like a 1.5% decrease in usage, which has happened over time. However, what we're looking at is the winter water use. It's a lot less elastic than the summer use. There's not a lot of outdoor use. So, we didn't assume there was big cutbacks in use. And the other thing I wanted to point out is, no one can ever perfectly project what the volume of usage is gonna be. If the use goes down, it means people are paying less, but it doesn't mean the financial needs are any less. A lot of the costs are fixed costs for the treatment plant at the district. The infrastructure needs don't get any cheaper if the flows go down by 20%. So it means you need a higher rate to still get the same level of revenues. And in fact, that's hit every agency all around California with the drought. Usage came down. Some agencies, part of the rate increases are to compensate for that. But again, that doesn't mean it's a bill increase because people are buying less units. But that's also another reason why, again, there's a lot of unknowns in the future. Is Sam gonna be able to get grant financing or, state revolving fund loan financing to help fund some of the costs of rebuilding the wastewater treatment plant conveyance system? We don't know at this stage, but what we do know is you do need significant rate increases, and from, some prior board meetings, we hashed through different ways of trying to get from here to there, and at the end of the day, it was decided, hey, we're gonna take 2 steps in the right direction and reevaluate and adjust course as needed. Hopefully in the future, it's, less rate increases, and that's always the hope, because these are significant, big steps in the right direction. So that's kind of the way we address it. A lot of these rate studies, we try to be reasonable, err a tiny bit on the conservative side, and we're gonna come back and reevaluate in a couple of years and see what the reality shows, and continue to look to the future and adjust courses as needed. So sorry to ramble on too much. Yeah.
You model no change in consumption based on rate increase.
We didn't assume any cutback, because also keep in mind you're coming out of a drought in which water use is temporarily curtailed, typically more
That's
than
all I was
normal,
asking. You
and things are
model-
bouncing up. Yeah, we didn't assume any. Water use may increase now that the state's out of a drought. People feel they can use more. At the same time, people may cut back some due to the thing. So we thought that was a reasonable approach to use, understanding you come back in the future and reevaluate. But I can guarantee you a rate increase does not lead to less revenues. So that Laffer curve, that's what it's
It's
talking
just an
about.
analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we see a lot of times is an initial dip down and it goes right back up. But yes, I mean, we think through these things, and it wasn't really, there's a reason why we're not putting it in right now. So actually there is a point that JQ has in his questions. I think most of the questions are actually addressed. But I think there is something that we need to, there's a need to be very clear about this, clearer than we were before, and that is, so his question is, are the potential financial impacts of litigation, legal and regulatory expenses factor into the proposed rates? So I think we addressed some of that, but the legal aspect is something that I want to highlight and make very clear. We're subject to, as I just stated, fines from the state. It's the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side due to the spill. That brought in the state reviewing all coast-side agencies, and all coast-side agencies are also subject to fines. Our fines are very are going to be negligible. However, the legal cost for a lawsuit that the city of Half Moon Bay brought against the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side, Granada Community Services District, and Montara Water and Sanitary District are something to mention. So if you look at the overall impact to the rates, I think it's going to be in a very low percentage rate, but it's definitely an impact that we're going to see over the next potentially 1 or 2 fiscal years.
Could you define low, like under 2%, under 10% of the total
I think
proposed rate increase?
it depends on which time frame you want to consider, of course, right?
I know you can't look into the future, but when you say low, how low are you talking? 2%, 10%?
The answer to the question is we don't know,
Yeah.
because the litigation is in process. So we
Right.
just have to leave it
So
at
you're
that.
So-
saying that the rates could actually go up even more, depending on the legal expense?
It's not just the
I
legal
can see
expenses. If they lose the decision, there's gonna be a reallocation of expenses.
So I think, again, this is all very unknown, but the rate increase right now is looking up for 2 years. In the 2 years, we can't raise rates further, okay? after the 2 years, the district has to reassess. That's all we can say.
They must have had a factor to kind of factor in legal versus all the deferred maintenance at SAM and how much deferred maintenance we have to take care of up here on our own.
Yes.
So that was not disclosed anywhere that I saw.
There's a little bit in the financial projections of some, potential costs, legal costs, but as this gentleman's pointing out,
It's
yeah,
unknown.
for an entire reallocation, if this suit goes through of cost, hasn't been modeled at all at this stage of the game, and, I mean,
But of the
See what happens.
proposed increase, would you say most of it's gonna be because of SAM and their deferred deferred maintenance on their infrastructure, or is it 50/50? You
I'm
guys didn't mention that in your
She's asking
study.
for
what percentage of everything?
Yeah, right
Percentage of
here,
everything?
need for rate increase,
Okay,
what's
just
the
a second.
percentage
Okay.
breakdown of
Let me
that?
suggest that I get back to you, because we would have to look at the numbers, but I think it's a very low percentage.
So the question.
For the legals,
Time out, guys.
No,
He-
not
was
just
he was
legal, but
concentrating on
SAM
something.
versus
Yeah.
MWSD.
Okay.
Hang on.
I wanna
He
get-
was concentrating on something else while you were asking the question.
Okay.
He didn't have his full attention. He's answering the question about the legal expenses.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Okay,
I
and what was your
understand.
follow-up question then?
Well, part of what I said at the microphone was, I didn't see when they have this chart on the wall, or on the screen up there, under key factors driving need for rate increases, SAM infrastructure, SAM operating expenses, aging MWSD sewer collection system, and small rate increase to keep up with the cost of inflation. Didn't you at least have a percentage breakdown on that?
So maybe the question is.
The allocation.
Maybe the question is, in the capital improvement portion of the budget, how much of that is the SAM infrastructure, and how much of it is the MWSD infrastructure? Just a global. That's the question. That is the question.
While they're thinking about that, let me just mention that we own SAM. And we have,
5%.
if you could let me, please.
Yeah.
Okay, we own SAM. So whether we're fixing a pipe or a pump here in Montara or Moss Beach, or we're doing something with SAM as part of the system to collect and transmit the wastewater to SAM, or we're doing something at SAM to deal with treatment or disposal, those are all part of the function that we're not complete unless we do all of those pieces. So it's good to understand the budget needs at SAM and the budget needs here for the sewer system, and we've had presentations all year long on what those things are and what the analysis is. And I'm not being flip when I say, if you look at our agendas from this year and the YouTube videos, all this is on YouTube, you can see a bunch of the presentations. And so there's a whole lot of information. We've been working our way towards this for some time. So I appreciate your questions, and these are good questions, and things that we can answer by looking at the materials and presentations that we've had this year. And I'm happy to sit down with you and look at more closely at some of these questions.
I just think
Okay,
if you're putting out a
I'm gonna put a
presentation,
time-
you need
I'm gonna put a
those
time out.
percentages.
Real question, do we have just a global breakdown of the infrastructure cost between?
Well, in the big picture, Sam, the operating costs are about half of your operating budget. And on the capital side, it's, looking forward, maybe it's more like 40%. But I want to point out that those costs have increased a lot over the years. You go back a handful of years, Sam was maybe 40% less than what they are now in the operating costs, and their capital needs were a lot lower. It honestly gets hard to try to break down how much of this increase is due to this versus this, because Sam's costs have escalated in recent years without corresponding rate increases. So going forward, is that because of what Sam has done over the last few years, or is that because, something else going forward? But I'd say, there's elements of both in there, and I think what you can show at the end of the day is what percentage of your dollars are going to SAM versus going to the district. And it looks like it's maybe 55%, well, and then Sam also does the collection services on contract for the maintenance, so I don't know if that counts as Sam or yours, but maybe at the end of the day, it's, somewhere close to 50/50 if you factor that in as a
My understanding was they had a lot of deferred maintenance. We usually, I'm pretty sure Clemens takes care of maintenance over time up here. but how much is it be due to their deferred maintenance and lack of good management down there?
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the staff. Any other questions you wish to address?
Yes, one more I think I should talk about, and that is I think that came from James, that the rate increases would bring us to more like the top of the line of the sewer agencies. That is not going to be the case, because all agencies have to go through this, or most agencies have to go through this. On the coast side, we understand that Granada Community Services District is going for a 3-year rate increase. We also understand that that rate increase is not sufficient. What Granada ultimately is doing is they're dipping into their reserves, and will have to make this up at a later time. The same is true for the City of Half Moon Bay. City of Half Moon Bay is currently not going for a rate increase this fiscal year. There is a lot of talk about doing this for the next fiscal year, the following fiscal year then. However, that's also the same scenario where those agencies are simply dipping into their reserves, and that leads then later on to higher rate increases and a rate shock. So if there is any questions that you feel weren't addressed properly, again, please contact me, contact us by email, phone. We are happy to address those.
Okay, I have one more individual who wishes to present to the board on, and that's Dolores Silva.
Dolores, no, I didn't.
This yours? I thought I had.
I have a question.
Well, you gave me a blue slip, so
I'm sorry.
Because they told me to write the question.
okay, so they gave you the question. Okay, fair enough. I just want to make sure you got,
I just, if you can't read my writing, I just wanted to know if there was a budget for Sam
Yes.
that we're expected to find what we don't see. I just wanted to know what it was.
The budget is in tonight's packet. The budget is available in,
So all of these things can be found online at our website or at the SAM website. And the two websites, the two websites are MWSD.montara.org.
Can I clarify my question though? What I really wanted to know is there an agreed to budget between the agencies for SAM? Because we hear a lot about the discord at the SAM board, and that nobody can seem to go forward because of this. And I was just wondering, I mean,
I think the answer to your
Montara.
question, yes, is all three agencies are being asked to approve a budget that has been.
so there has.
I really want to answer this. I'm really excited. I'm really excited that you brought that up. So Catherine and I sit on SAM's directors there as well. Tonight, on our agenda, after this item, we're going to be hearing whether or not to approve the SAM budget. So there's a whole lot of detail in tonight's packet that goes into all that, and I beg you, please stay for that, because your question about, are we able to get things done at SAM, and do we have a plan? Look, we've been working really hard, despite the fact that Half Moon Bay has adopted a new position about how a lot of this isn't their problem. That's where the lawsuit comes from, I think. But we have a lot of work to do, and even with all of the discord, we have a budget that the 6 directors at SAM, 2 from Granada, 2 from Half Moon Bay, and 2 from here, adopted for distribution to the member agencies, and each owner has to approve it. And once the owners approve it, then we take it back to SAM, and we ratify it, and then we put it into place. So we've done the first couple of parts of that, and tonight I hope that we approve this budget, because we need to do that for our ability to go collect the money from through the county tax assessment. And our partners have to do the same thing. So we're at that part of the year where we're getting down to the wire, we've got to get the financial stuff done. But please stay, because you'll learn quite a bit about that if you do.
Okay, so with that, I am going to close the public hearing.
I'm
Yes, sir.
sorry, there was a couple of questions that I submitted you didn't.
Which question for those real quickly?
One I was going to ask about the Cabrillo Highway Express Sewer project. It's actually 31% of your total capital spending in the sewer rate study. That's pretty significant. but I haven't been able to find any information about that project at all on your website. And I even asked Clemens about it a couple weeks ago, I believe, and said you didn't have anything. That seems a little odd.
The Cabrillo Express sewer?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
the project
So,
itself.
yeah.
There's no information on the project on your website.
There should be, because we approved the project, including plans, and I'm sorry, I don't recall
I don't remember
the
seeing
question
the
that
information.
you asked the question, but we have that
Oh,
information.
It's in my list of written questions that I submitted. But, yeah, I couldn't find anything on your website about that at all.
Okay.
There's just mention of it, and of course, there's a budget for it in there, but there's no discussion of exactly what it is and what, everything, it's, all the details about what's being replaced where.
Yes, I mean, we have the plans available, right? Yes.
They're available?
Were they in the packet? Because I don't remember seeing the resolution, but I
No.
don't remember seeing the
No,
details.
it was actually voted on, I believe, a meeting or two back with a complete description.
Right.
I saw that, I didn't see the details of the
Yeah, I went
project.
through all
I
the
saw the
documents, I couldn't
resolution.
find
The
anything
1
about
minute
it.
Go
description
ahead.
of the project?
You go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so, in 1 or 2 minutes, starting prior to Clemens and coming here, actually, the district did a full, as manager, GM, George Irving had a full CCTV, a closed-circuit television study of the infrastructure completed. And it identified that the former Country Lane, now known as Highway 1, has the sewer largely underneath the northbound lane. It's very shallow and has longitudinal stress cracks. Exacerbated by the problem about 2007, Caltrans paved over a number of the structures, preventing the district from maintaining them, at which time, while we were trying to get Caltrans to grant us a permit to open those structures, roots got in and caused a spill into the beach. So starting in 2012, now this is a number of years ago, we put in an application for Caltrans. That permit to realign the sewer as far over to the shoulder as we could, and rehabilitate what we can within the budget. I'd like to realign the whole thing, but we have budget constraints, all the way up through Montara, all the way to the Canal pump station, at the very far end by the restaurant. It's an extremely long pipe that takes all of the sewer to the north. It took 4 years for Caltrans to approve the permit. They're not happy with the sewer, they don't want it there, but the reality was there before the highway. So the short answer is we have a permit in place, and phase 1 was just approved for construction. The contractor is getting the notice to proceed presently as we're getting the pre-construction meeting set with Caltrans to start. Phase 1, we're going to improve the crossing, deepen it, we're going to move the sewer about 15 feet over towards the east, and then phase 2, 3, and 4 will, over time, rehabilitate the rest. But we have a 4 to 5 year delay with Caltrans alone, which is not been.
Okay, now those points you just mentioned, they were on your website, but that's not, I'm talking about a detailed project plan that really talks about all the elements that go into this. And in fact, there's also a new sewer system proposed for 14th Street, and there's no details about that.
I don't know what you're referring to there, other than infrastructure replumbing to make that project in cooperation with Caltrans.
Okay, are those details available anywhere? Is there like a project
Those-
presentation
those-
packet that we can
Those
see?
plans were, well, phase 1B has not been issued for bid yet. The proposed plan was put out in 2012. And the current plan, which was approved and voted on by the board, is phase 1, which just crosses the highway here.
Okay.
And that was on the April 5th agenda, so
Yeah.
there's a little detail in the packet.
Not beyond what he just said.
There's a question of what you mean by detail.
Yeah.
What he just said, we could read.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's
But
not
an actual
detailed.
project plan, no.
Right. Okay, then I have one other question you didn't get to, and I was asking, can the increased amounts of $525,000 a year for sand capital expenditures be deferred until Granada and Half Moon Bay agree to and approve their shares of that increase? And I'm also wondering, what's the probability that Granada and Half Moon Bay will approve those increases?
So the second part is a question to the board. But the first part is, if we delay any rate increase, we simply are going to increase later rate increases. I think that's the answer to your question. So the deferring of projects is not a question, not possible. the deferring of sending additional money to SAM, therefore, is also not possible. What that means is we would have to dip down into our reserves even further. Now, our reserves, we built up to fund Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the Cabrillo Highway project, and that is what we're planning to do. So we already had to dip into reserves, if you look at our last year's budget, significantly last year. So I will not recommend to continue drawing down on our reserves.
Okay, but what I'm seeing is we're gonna start paying for those SAM expenditures starting in July. But what if Half Moon Bay says they're not paying for it? We're paying more money that's never gonna be used for that project.
Do we get it back?
Okay, so I think it's difficult to answer because ultimately I have to get back to that the infrastructure projects at SAM can't really be deferred. Okay? That means they have to be paid for. I can't answer the question if Granada or the city of Half Moon Bay are approving the budget, but you see what happened last year. The city did not approve the budget, however paid.
Under protest, yeah.
But they pay.
They paid.
The money's in the bank.
Okay.
Well, what about the phase-in method 3 as opposed to the
That's the
big
approach,
front-ended?
that's the approach we're taking.
Oh, you are, I'm sorry, I thought they
Yeah,
said.
no, we considered the other two,
Oh.
and 3 came out of looking at 1 and 2 and going, they can't do that.
Right, so, and I think now I'm going to get back to my statement earlier. You know, I'm happy to have a one-on-one discussion with any one of you guys and address further questions or receive questions in writing.
Okay, I think with that, I am going to close the public hearing and bring this discussion to the board. We have had received comments from the public, and I think they've been well articulated. And so why don't I start with Bill?
See, in this whole thing, that we can't really lose track of the fact that the SAM infrastructure, the force main, which would be the force main and some gravity flow sections, basically how the sewage gets from here to there, to this sewer plant in Half Moon Bay over by the Lutheran Church. That is in bad shape. Okay, as testimony to that there was deferred maintenance on that force main that should have been taken care of really in about 2010, and it wasn't. And all of a sudden we have a major spill and we get a $500,000 fine. And that by statute, it could have been much worse. Okay, the other part is the SAM plant itself has had major deferred maintenance, and there's been some emergency repair authorizations that weren't in the budget just simply because of the fact that it could not be deferred any longer because it failed, and it failed in such a way that it jeopardized the ability to operate the whole plant. And I'm specifically talking about an electrical feeder failure. So that no matter what we do, we can't gloss over the fact that these expenditures, and I hear them called capital improvement expenditures, they're not improvements at all. They're basically to maintain the infrastructure so that it will function. And it will function and meet the regulatory requirements, and it will prevent us from getting fines that go up very drastically, can get very drastic very quickly. So that's the reality we face, is the fact that the infrastructure as it relates to SAM and the infrastructure as it relates to the SAM plant has had deferred maintenance over a long period of time, and you just can't defer any longer without the possibility of significant environmental damage and significant fines. And that's what we're faced with. So whether we've done the process correctly or that there's some item in the budget that we should defer or not defer, you know, it's really minuscule in comparison to the fact that we're really facing pretty close to a crisis here.
Did Sam ever approve the preventative maintenance program that was proposed recently?
They did recently.
Yeah,
It is approved.
yeah, we're finding a way to get some work done in spite of everything.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim?
To continue on with Bill's comment, Sam approved it recently, but it was initially brought up, similar plan 12 years ago now, and that was not approved. Sid, to get to your point, what percentage of the delay, the deferral of repairing the SAM plant is someone else's fault? That's a good question. You should, any of us on the board could answer that question for you. It's involved in the lawsuit. It's a difficult, we don't go into the details now, but that's a good question. You'll get that answer, and that's an important issue. The SAM plant is an older plant. The things need to be repaired. For example, the generator was placed in the lowest part of the generator for the emergency generator for power, a big diesel train engine thing, was put in the lowest part of the plant. If a tsunami comes over, the burn and we're immediately troubled. That has to be changed. The pump stations throughout are rusty. They have to be fixed. The electrical panels need to be replaced. Our pipe section has still not complete. To be, we can't. That's 50%. That may go up. The lawsuit may have an effect. I mean, we have to do the maintenance here. The board, we didn't make up this budget. We spent a lot of time. A lot of time has been spent. This is not a made-up thing. It'd be nice. It's nice. It's easy to say, well, cut back expenses, and we can't do this. But sometimes we just have to do these things. But I want to ask a question to Dave and to the comments in reference to the questions about postponing this and giving more time. What is it possible to wait 2 months? Would that just delay the tax bill going in? What are our options if we did delay? Knowing full well that delaying, for those that did ask, to get more protest letters in, to stop the process. So, that's.
Well, no, wait a minute.
One more month.
Wait, this is a state of the board right now.
Or not necessarily, or maybe to help the people understand it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so.
Some of us might retract our.
Yeah.
That's right.
So Dave, what are the, I apologize. So Dave, how can that be done? Can we do that?
Well, I would say that the pivotal time factor is submission of the tax bill, or the amounts to be charged on ensuing tax bill. And that information has to go to the county tax collector recorder sometime in August. I think you don't want to go beyond, you can't go beyond August.
July 30 is the deadline.
Yeah.
July the 30th. And if we don't get it in by then we lose the taxes for that year.
Yes.
Correct? We can't do it in September and get part of the taxes. We have to do it by July 30th.
I think Clement said the real deadline for us to be able to do that would be July 15th.
July 15th.
Well, we're in a fiscal year basis. To meet the fiscal year, the ensuing fiscal year, an adoption of the ordinance could be made operative from July 1. I would not recommend delaying that, beyond the time necessary to submit the information to tax collector.
The other question that was asked, Clemens, when the notice went out, was there a form to fill out, or?
No.
What is the requirements for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the gentleman here was reading a wrong portion of the law. It's California Constitution, Article 13D, Section 6. You have to send a notice that, date and time of a public hearing, the proposed rate increases. You have to send at least 45 days in advance. So you more than met that, and you could, Article 13D, Section 6 of the Constitution. You actually even put in here, which is not required by the law, what's the process for submitting protests and how you can get them in and where to mail them and everything else. So you kind of went above and beyond. This is not an assessment ballot. It's a Prop 218 process. When they adopted Prop 218, they recognized water and sewer and garbage were kind of essential services. So it's not just a vote every time you want to raise rates. The public would never vote for rate increases, but there is this process in place that you have adhered to.
Okay, so I think he answered that question.
No, we didn't.
Again, I'm gonna keep it, I hate to do this, but I wanna keep this to the board right now, and if we close the public hearing at this point in time. Jim,
And then the other thing is Clemens.
Go ahead, Jim, please.
Clemens and Dave, so within keeping with that July 15th or July 1st, what are the logistics of postponing this beyond this meeting? What are the possibilities, or is that a possibility to do that and keep that deadline with the meetings we have and the process?
So, first of all, let me clearly say what Alex was explaining here also, and that is a revision to the Prop 218 process is not possible now. We have a 45-day period, noticing period. We can't get that done, period. I think that answers part of your question. The other part is, could this be delayed? I think this item could be moved to a following meeting. However, it's going to be very difficult to find a meeting for us in July, as you see on this agenda. In June, as you see on this agenda. Again, I want to point to that this process has started over a year ago. It was a very public process. It was in the newspaper several times. I also want to point back to that, if there are concerns, I want to encourage everybody to ask, going forward, to ask the district questions in advance. I think it is, of course, part of the process to be here at the Prop 218 hearing and ask questions, but even the notice is encouraging everyone to contact the district with questions. So I think everybody really had a chance to ask those in advance, and I'm glad we can address tonight a lot of questions.
So the chances of having a meeting in June are minimal, or what did you say? You mentioned
We're going to
June.
have a hard time scheduling a meeting in June, yes. Yeah.
Dave?
Mr. President, one of the options you might consider is based on the fact that the ordinance and the matter before you is establishing a maximum rates. So you have an option of exercising some discretion to enacting rates which would appear in the master fee schedule below the maximums that are before you tonight. And you've done that before, but there again,
your recommendation from staff is, and consultant is based on the anticipated costs, and the law requires that the rates be related to, directly related to the cost of the service provided. So, if you were to enact a rate less than the maximum, assuming you adopted the ordinance as presented tonight with the recommendation of staff, if you were to enact a rate in the master fee schedule less than the maximum, appropriate adjustments would have to be made with respect to the expenditures. I say that right now, based on the consultant study and the staff study regarding the use of the funds we collected, and of course, the estimated revenues, revenues are estimated because they're based on anticipated water usage. And if those estimates, if the actual usage falls short of that, then again you have another shortfall with respect to revenues to fund the facilities that are proposed to be funded by the increase.
Okay. Thank you, I'm through. Okay, Scott?
Should I call Catherine at this
And
point?
then call
Yeah,
Catherine.
please go ahead and call Catherine. Let me just start off. I just can't say thank you enough to all of you who are here tonight, and I also want to give a shout out to Lenny for all of her time at the post office, getting people's attention, and we're here a lot in this room and down at the SAM board meetings, and having participation. I don't like the fact that it takes folks getting concerned about things that there's not feeling of enough good information.
Hey, Catherine.
But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to hear your questions, and I'm sincere about. I'm happy to meet with people, particularly at the coffee shop, sit down and take as long as it takes.
You know, I did hear suggestions to show up with pitchforks and torches, so. Consider
I'd
yourself
like to-
lucky.
Yeah, well, you talked about, we're here to make tough decisions. I think some of those long Saturday Finance Committee budget preparation meetings is part of that. And I'm one of those people who's been doing that at SAM, and then here, I believe it's been Bill and Catherine working with staff, getting us to where we have budgets, and we have agreements, and we have plans. I'm glad you're tuning in and asking all these questions, and we're ready to answer a lot of those questions for you. We have a lot of work to draw on that we're happy to share with you. And we want to take your input. I want to mention too, as we look at, say, the 40 million that Sam has identified, this is based on identifying all of the pieces in the system, looking at how old they are, looking at when they were put into service, looking at what they're going to cost to replace if what we do is just replace them straight across as they wear out. That 40 million is, okay, if we do the default plan and just replace things when they wear out, that's what it's gonna cost us over the next 20 years. It's the way I look at my house. I know when my roof is gonna wear out according to the warranty, which won't ever be honored because that contractor's gonna be long gone before my roof wears out. It's happened to me once already. But, we make our plans based on what we know about what we've got in the system and when it's likely to wear out. And we've done the inventory work and some of the engineering work that goes into figuring out, okay, what's it gonna cost to replace that when the time comes. That informs decisions like, okay, what needs to come first? That informs decisions like, is it better to try to extend the life by doing more maintenance on it? It informs decisions like, are we even doing it the best way? When you know you've got 40 million in spending to do, you've got a lot of liberty to go in and go, if we're gonna have to spend like that, maybe there's a better way to spend that 40 million. In this room and down at the SAM board meeting, we've had people ask us the point blank question, that's a lot of money, why don't we just replace the plant? It's obviously just a really bad idea. Well, it's not a really bad idea. It's how sewer plants have been built in this country and around the world for a very long time. it's just been doing a lot of service for 45 years. Things wear out, you gotta take care of that. So what we're trying to do now is identify what are some of the alternatives, and this is in fact a discussion we've had at this very board table a number of times. What are our options? Can we do things in the way that we do our collection and our treatment that would be more effective with less money, or at least with the same money, maybe we do a better job? I'll tell you one of the big challenges at SAM, we discharge all of our water that we treat out into the ocean. I don't think we treat it well enough before we put it in the ocean. So I, for years, have been looking at ways, how can we treat it better so that what we discharge is something that's better for the environment, for the surfers and swimmers that are out there. We think about these things, but you can't just snap your fingers and say, well, I don't like that, we're gonna just change it. We have to make some plans, but knowing that 40 million gives us something to work with. You know, we are having those discussions, and I invite your thoughts and your questions on those topics, because this is where we get a chance to be really, truly innovative if we come up with something. We've got some ideas that we're exploring, but what we're doing tonight is talking about how much money can we collect. What we're doing tonight is not approving any specific project or any specific technology for a project. All of those things will come back to this board in subsequent meetings, here and at SAM. So if you take any project that's on our project list, if you think you've got a better idea, talk to us about it. One or both of us will learn something, and this is how this goes. And we've had some really good input from the community on some of these things. We've been really blessed in the community. Have some people with some amazing background, skills, credentials, experience. That's my warm-up. I wanted to get to a couple of the specific questions. No, okay, I just took care of that one. I just have to say, I was one of the people standing out at the post offices and going door to door when we went to go buy the water system. I promise you, there was no member of this board that told anyone that we were ever gonna lower rates. What we said, no, we were very careful to make sure that we never used any language that would suggest that, because that's not what we were intending to do. We're looking at skyrocketing rates and said as long as it's in the corporate hands, it's gonna keep going up, because we knew what plans they had in front of the California Public Utilities Commission. We spent a lot of time at the commission, the staff in front of the commissioners, talking to the commissioners and talking to the corporate owners. I remember having a conversation with the head guy from Thames Water. Really, really beautiful $3,000 suit, probably 2,500 pound suit. Really interesting guy. We were never going to get anywhere with those people. We wound up buying the system, and what we did was we took these skyrocketing rates and we brought them down to keep them much closer to inflation. We had to do a whole lot of work to repair things, but we did what we said we were going to do. And you can look at what we've done in the past 12, 13 years.
15.
Time passes. The past 15 years. I'm glad you remember.
I do remember.
But I remember distinctly. That if any,
Someone did give that information.
not a member of this board, because not a member of the board, because we took pains to check.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Well, okay.
Scott,
We took pains to make sure that none of us like stepped into that, because we didn't want to have to deal with this. We wanted to be really straight up about it. All right. So, there was a question about who fixes our infrastructure here. I believe you asked that, and versus who, you know, the differences between SAM and Montara. Maintenance and emergency services are conducted by the SAM staff as contractors to us. They actually operate two different capacities. One is running the infrastructure, and the other is they've got a whole separate couple of crews that do line cleanings and repairs and dealing with emergencies.
So part of our money pays them.
Again,
Yes, of course. And then, so,
Just a point,
for
Scott,
for projects that we do here,
I want to keep the discussion to the board at this point in time, please, so we can process.
okay, so the construction projects that we do here, these are done, run by, you know, the bids are put out by this agency and overseen by the agency. So there's a division of labor, but usually pretty clear lines. And I think I'll just come back to it's been a long process, and I'm well aware that we all have busy lives and most people aren't paying attention to this all the time. And to some degree, I think that's good because it means, by and large, things are working, we're not thinking about it every day, and that's one of our goals, not to keep you in the dark, but to make it so you don't have to worry about it all the time, because we'll do that here. You're always invited to come, and I'll just close by reiterating, I'm really happy to sit down with anybody and go find the things that help answer the questions, that show you the process that we've been going through. And now that you know, this is something that you can watch the budget starting to come together. We started the budget process at SAM in November. And I was in meetings on weekends at SAM in December, because we were trying to get ready for the things that eventually wind up here. Our budget here is very heavily driven by the budget there. So we got to start early there, get it all ready, get it here, and then go through our process here. So thank you for coming.
Okay, Catherine?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're coming across really well.
Okay, good. First, I want to thank everyone who's taken their evening to come down and make their opinions and thoughts and questions known to us. I do want to start by saying 2018 is the 60th anniversary of MSD, and 15 years ago we became MWSD. We are a unique, community-created and community-owned water and sewer and sanitary district, and it's impressive, frankly, that so many people pay attention to what's going on. I received a letter from somebody asking about new equipment and relocating equipment. I can tell you we've been looking at that for years. It's very expensive. It requires a lot of permitting, but it may be useful. We've had some long-term financial projections that give me some hope, but it's at the very beginning of the information gathering, so we will keep you posted. The rate, MWSD has been replacing sewer pipes over years. We have a program now where we are going to be, when we're doing sewer work in your neighborhood, we're going to be offering to replace your laterals so we can cut down on our I&I, our inflow and infiltration. We are working to reduce our cost of SAM by reducing our flows to SAM. And that's why we're looking at people's laterals and trying to find a way to help them replace them, because many of our laterals are old and broken, and they let in a lot more water to SAM that we all have to pay for, particularly during the wet season. But SAM is a case of long-term deferred maintenance. We didn't have to pay much for it, and we've had this revolving door of managers. Hopefully with our new strong manager, this revolving door will stop and we can get things in better order. But as Clement said, when you defer maintenance on things, what was a patch becomes a replacement, and it's a lot more expensive. So that's one of the problems we're looking at. I believe that my observations are that water conservation, which we've always been very strong on in Montara, and frankly, I think we use less water in Montara than in Half Moon Bay or Grenada. But we have a more complex system, as Pippin said. But our decreased revenues are because we have had decreased usage. And we have a usage-based system. Grenada charges every household, whether it has one resident or 10 residents, the same rate. And so it's averaged across. So it's something they have talked about changing, but have not gotten the political will to do, frankly. And if we were to do that, single resident households would go up, and multiple resident households or households with teenagers in the shower a lot would go down. And it's just the way the economics work. We have, as a board, worked to decrease our fixed costs over time. We are working to decrease our overtime costs, our labor costs, both at Sam and here at Montara, although Montara doesn't pay anything for sewer labor except through Sam. But we've been working on that. But there's a time when the greater efficiencies get overcome by the increased cost. And because of the lawsuit with Half Moon Bay, because of the spills at Sam, because of the deferred maintenance, and frankly because maybe we should have, instead of taking 8 years to make the same rate increases as our last rate increase, which was what we could have accomplished in 4 years and come back for even more money, we didn't do that. And maybe we should have. Maybe we should be looking at a better way to build our reserves. But our focus has been to keep our costs as low as possible over time, realizing that everyone has increasing costs and that these increasing costs hit hard, particularly on some households. So we've been very cautious of that. And I will also mention that there are increased regulations and oversight from the regulators, and that also costs us more. But again, I hope you folks understand this. If you have more questions, there are board member cards on the table on the right as you're leaving the office on the way to the exit. Please pick them up. Our email is there. Our phone numbers are there. Please call the board members. We will be very happy to talk to you and work to answer your questions. We are, as I started my comments with, MWSD is owned by the community. It was created by the community, and we work hard to represent the community. And so I thank you all for being here.
Okay, I guess my turn. Oops. You know, this is a tough one. We have I've been in, I don't know, many of you was on the school board for 12 years and been on this group for a while. And it's amazing that we see folks coming during times such as these, when the rate increases are being recommended, when taxes are being proposed and the like, and which is I don't know what the balance of how can you get more information to more people who are already overloaded with information that come to in the first place. At the end of the day, I think that we've learned a few lessons tonight. I think there are ways that we could be more transparent in giving this information to you, and we will take that on. I'd like to be able to have that information so you all felt that you're part of the process. I hope in return what you're hearing is this group has really worked hard on this process. No one in this room wants to increase rates or taxes for anything. We are you. They're my rates or your rates and anything else. You all are well aware of the discussions and challenges that we've had with this GPA and the sewer district and the good work that Scott and Catherine is not easy. We as a society, unfortunately, and you all know this, deferred maintenance is everywhere. You know, we as a society have chosen not to maintain our roads, our sewers, anything you think about. We just don't like to maintain them. And we have gotten ourselves into a real pickle now that, and particularly the way the state does sewers, if you have a leak, you get fined, and that money comes right from us. They'll give you half of it back for projects they determine is appropriate. So, you know, if we don't do something, we're gonna do it anyway, because we're gonna get fined. And ultimately, the challenge we may have is that state could take it over, and then you lose local control. So you just don't want that. So I think the takeaway for me is, I'm gonna go ahead and vote for this tonight. But many of you have come and said, we have suggestions on how there might be ideas to do that. I do not want to hostage this rate increase, which we absolutely need, for the process. And what's been reminded is this gives us the authority to charge, but it has not made the decisions on the projects that we're doing. And there's where the opportunity I have to think as a group. If this community really wants to get involved with this, knowing that you all have 50,000 liens, like everyone around you does, there is this opportunity. But I do not think we have the luxury of deferring deferred maintenance at this point in time. You saw that big project out down off Highway 1. That project, deferred maintenance, and a $600,000 fine on top of that. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, so I'm gonna recommend that we proceed with this. And with that in mind, I'd like to have a motion for such.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
Roll call.
As a roll call, any further discussion?
No.
If not, can we have a roll call, please?
Do you need Catherine on the phone to do that?
She's here.
Okay.
Okay.
Catherine, can we hear your voice? Not hearing you, are you on mute?
How many letters did you get?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay.
It's a roll call vote. Catherine?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Director Slater Carter,
Aye.
Director Boyd,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Harvey,
Aye.
Director Hebert.
All right, and to the question of how many protest letters.
So, we have identified 1,969 parcels in the district, and we received 232 protests, and that is 11.8% of the parcels protested.
Pretty lame.
Okay, I'm gonna give us a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back together for the rest of the Okay, we have a lot to do, and I'm going to ask that we be as efficient in processing the rest of the agenda as we can.
I know you're talking to me.
Yeah, I am talking. So, so I may get a little more authoritarian as we get closer to the hour. Okay, our next is our consent agenda, and on the consent agenda is approved minutes for May 3rd, 2018, approved financial statements for April 2018.
But there were no financial statements, Dwight.
Huh?
There were no financial.
There were no financial statements, okay. It's, drop that.
Okay.
Number 3, approved warrants for May 31st, 2018. SAM flow report for April. Monthly review of the current investment portfolio. Connection permit applications received. Monthly water production report for April 2018. The rain report, the solar energy report, and the monthly public agency retirement service report for March 2018. Are there any items that any of you wish to pull from the consent agenda? Hearing none, can we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, please, somebody.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
This roll call?
Very good things, because she's.
Oh, my goodness, okay. Go ahead, Kate.
Okay, Director Slater Carter,
Aye.
Director Boyd,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Harvey,
Aye.
Director Hebert.
Aye.
Okay, 5-0. New business, review and possible action concerning SAM's fiscal year 2018-2019 budget. And again, if we can be efficient on this item, I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Dwight. So we've heard this item now several times. Real briefly, we have increases, as we just mentioned before. Overall collections budget is suggested to increase by 16% over the prior fiscal year, and the assessment for the collections contract services by 17%. So the general budget that is now containing an infrastructure division budget is suggested to increase by 18%, and Montara's assessment would increase by 12%, which translates ultimately in $1.25 million that Montara has to pay to SAM on the general budget side, and around $180,000 on the collection side. Again, this was presented and discussed before. We had the SAM manager here to answer questions, and I'm suggesting to hand this to the board now. Staff prepared a resolution of the Montara Water and Sanitary District consenting to approval by the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side of its general budget for fiscal year 18-19.
Any comments from our SAM reps before we go to the open board?
I strongly urge passage of this budget.
Catherine, do you agree?
Absolutely.
Okay. Jim? Any comments beyond?
No comments.
Bill?
Well, when I looked at it, I tried looking at it the same way that I look at our budget, and there's just so many areas that I had questions on, but I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we all have concerns and issues, but I think given the work that's been done and where we're at with Sam, we're probably going to find where we need to approve it. Can we have a motion, please?
So moved. Let me just mention, at least this year, we've got the complete inventory with the end of life and replacement cost estimates. So we're operating from a better informed, somewhat updated list of capital needs. So it's a start, and starting to get this done. And I'm with you. We need better budgeting.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, roll call, please.
Okay. Director Slater-Carter,
Aye.
Director Boyd,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Harvey,
Aye.
Director Huber.
No.
All right, passes 4-1. I'm wondering, we have to add, Dave, I know you'll keep the articles, we gotta make sure we get that one item in the agenda as well.
You're gonna have it at your
One,
discretion.
at my discretion. Oh, I love discretion. All right, number 2 is review and possible action concerning MWSD fiscal year 2018-2019 draft water and sewer budgets and capital improvement programs.
Okay, thanks, Dwight. So I'm just going to keep it short and hand this over to Peter in just a second to present this a little bit, and hopefully we can go through this and just address the main questions. What I'm going to say is this is a draft budget, and it is in very draft form. So there is a lot of stuff that we have to work on. Ultimately, we just want you guys to see that we're working on the budget, get some questions addressed, refer this to also to the Finance Committee. We want to meet with the Finance Committee before we go to the board for approval on this one more time. So that's really what we're asking for. Peter, if I can hand this over to you, and we're just going to walk through the main points.
Gentlemen, once again, briefly, with the Finance Committee met, as well as Clemens and myself. The items that have been touched on are labor. We have both of our CIP draft budgets for both the water and sewer side. Those have been input. There are issues that need to be addressed. On the revenue side, we don't have anything for sewer. That's been budgeted as flat at this point because we don't know. Water, we do have a 3% rate increase based on the water rate study. Still need to get input from the Finance Committee regarding what that will do in terms of the revenue being brought in for the fiscal year. Still undecided. As of right now, it's been increased about $100,000 based on 3% rate increase. The major items that need to be addressed on the revenue side, property tax was a big one. We typically budget about $235,000 per fund, water and sewer, and that always very close captures what we actually collect. This year we have a $40,000 increase for both sides, and that is with the consideration that we may get ERAF funds. We typically have not budgeted those monies into the revenue model because we just are never sure if we're going to receive them or not. This was at the request of a board member in the Finance Committee to be discussed. That item was a large one on the revenue side. On the operations side, once more, sewer side, the discussion is going to be on professional services. What do we expect? And that will be hashed out with the Finance Committee further. And then on the water side, one large increase was because of the anticipation of hiring one more full-time water operator and reducing the use of temporary worker. So those are the major items that have been addressed at some level, but not fully hashed out at this point.
Okay.
Any questions that you'd like to ask of me, I'm able to answer.
Well, maybe what we could do with Catherine and Bill, since you're both on the Finance Committee, any further thoughts on what's been presented?
Just to reinforce what Clement said, that it was been a sort of work in progress, and we still have a lot more work to do on it.
I do have one question. I'm looking at your 2018, 2019, I think this is your water.
Yes, you're more than likely finding the mistake that was caught this morning when I was discussing with
So that
Clement for all other
891,
accounts.
790 is not accurate?
Excuse me?
Do you have a deficit for the 2018, 2019?
897, no, that is not a formula error. What was the error is if you go up midway through the page on the expense, the operating expense side, all other accounts, that is projected for an increase of $324,000. There is one line item that was a miskey, a very large miskey, which I apologize for the mistake. But this is not a $324,000 increase. It is a actually decrease. So this was corrected. The account is account 6370. Lab equipment, it's typically budgeted about $2,000. For some reason, my fingers got in the way of my mind and budgeted much more, but it is a mistake.
In general, I would recommend not to look at the cash flow ultimately, because this is going to be adjusted through the capital improvement program as well. So it's not necessarily what we're shooting for. It's just the numbers that are in there right now showing that.
So Peter, welcome to the club, the Screw Up Club. We're all members of that. You get to join now.
I've joined it a long time ago. I appreciate that. On a bigger stage.
Jim, any questions?
No questions.
Okay. And this is just presentation. We don't require a vote on expression.
No.
No.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Number 3 is review and possible action concerning award a contract for 2017-2018 sewer improvement projects and spot repairs.
Okay, so our regular annual sewer project came back, so we asked for that to go to be able to bid that some meetings ago, and we got this bid back at actually pretty much the engineer's estimate, and the bids were received by Pacific Trenchless for $595,391. That's the base bid, and $286,000 and for the additive alternative bid. So I'm going to hand this briefly to Pippin. Ultimately recommend, of course, the adoption of the resolution approving and authorizing the execution of the agreement of the work.
Thank you, Clemens, and excuse me, to the board tonight. Thank you for having me here to explain this project. I'm excited to bring this back to you. We are later in the season than we had originally anticipated. We had asked for this project to be, your approval to bid it some months back in concept, but then at subsequent meetings, at your direction and through input with discussing with Clemens and the potential fines to the state on the bigger picture of sewer management, we reevaluated our sewer code in the interim here at the district and addressed the concept of offering homeowners the opportunity, if the budget made sense on the project, to give the district the discretion to extend sewer lateral repairs beyond what had been done for the last 10 years, where we went from the main to the property line. The main argument in the past was it really encourages repairs because homeowners have a difficult time dealing with the county encroachment permit. The approach now was to look at adding the incremental cost to go to the house because we're already doing the work. And we have a construction method that in most cases, not every project will we see numbers quite this low, particularly for open trenching, but in most cases where we have good grade, we can pipe burst, where we put one hole at the street, and typically we've had one hole at the property line. Now we maybe can move that hole closer to the house, or possibly add a third hole, pull the pipe all the way through. And both the first and second bidders, when we analyzed the bid, had that incremental cost less than $1,000, significantly less, $600 to $725 range, $675 to $725 range was the incremental cost to the project, so about $35,000 over what we would have expected to pay for this project had we not added that extra footage for the upper laterals. So looking at how we've seen other agencies implement lateral ordinances and the incredible administrative overhead that is usually involved with pursuit of making each person change their lateral because we happen to be working on a sewer pipe in the street, that money we feel is better spent straight on the pipe work, and rather than paying for staff time to oversee it. So it's on par with a similar cost, and that's something I think I'm really excited to bring to the board today, as I think that the advantage of this project and the environmental benefits and benefits to the community are better than we expected, and I hope to keep it that way on future projects.
Okay, so thank you, Pippin.
Thank you.
Questions?
So on this particular project, we're going to do some lateral works and then it's to the benefit of the homeowner.
Correct.
How are we going to make sure that they're aware that we're doing that, and how do we derive benefit from the fact that they understand we did something that's pretty unusual and pretty beneficial for them?
That's a really good question. The district's already sent out an initial notice to the particular homeowners identified in the base bid. We held back on notifying the alternative bids because we weren't sure what the board's direction would be tonight if we were to approve the whole project or portions of the project. But an initial notification has gone out to homeowners with a detailed description of what a lateral is and how our project is giving them an opportunity for this repair. And then we're including like a acknowledgement waiver, so they'll sign basically a short agreement that says we accept that you're going to replace this at no charge to us. It's still our own private lateral, and basically it's like a right of entry. So far I've received positive feedback from homeowners. And I think in the future, if we have a more stable budget, it's easier from the notification standpoint to not have this alternative bid. Because it delays notification for that second group of people. Because we don't want to disappoint people saying, we might replace it, oh, sorry, maybe next year. But that, in general, getting out a first round of notifications, and then the contractor will do a second round of notifications. We could do a second round of notifications on the district level too. So I think there's some clarification that's been there, out there, and I think we'll be happy to take input from you if you have, if you'd like to review those materials in more detail and provide comments.
Jim? Jim?
No, good.
Catherine? Scott? Do we have a motion?
No, I was waiting to see. Catherine, did you have any questions?
No, I don't. I think this will be good for by making upper lateral repairs. I think it benefits everyone in the district. And I hope we can make this a regular, practice.
How do we intend to make sure that homeowners are on the same page with us about disruption to their landscaping and restoration to some certain state?
So that is something that is addressed in the notice that's sent out. And we actually have quite some experience with this because we do this every year, meaning I want to point out what a good job Pippin actually does in the field, walking out there, making sure that the contractor is extremely aware of this and also talking to the customers directly.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
That's all you need to say. Pippin talks to customers directly.
Yes.
All right. I'm good.
Good.
Thank you.
And I don't think if it was mentioned that we're addressing also an area here that Sam actually had some issues with I&I in the recent months. So there was some high I&I situations, and we're looking at portions of that right now.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Can we have a motion, please?
So make the motion.
I second the motion.
God, this is a competition here. Let's give the motion to Bill. And
Bill's got this kind of stubby, laid back style, but I think you beat me on that.
Yeah, I do.
You did.
Yeah.
All right, roll call, please.
Okay. Director Slater-Carter,
Aye.
Director Boyd,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Harvey,
Aye.
Director Huber.
All right. Okay, the next item is review and possible action concerning approval of purchase order for 2018 Chevrolet Colorado replacement through the California State Contract 118-2320D.
So,
New car?
yeah, well, I have to thank Bill for letting me know how to present this item. And let me start with that also Catherine contributed to this because some months actually she questioned why we're driving around with such a rust bucket. I think she was more eloquent than that, but we are in need of a new light-duty vehicle so that we actually can equip an operator with an appropriate vehicle. The Ford F-250 that we're looking to replace was designed as a leak truck. It never functioned as a leak truck. It was wrongly constructed. That's why it has very low miles on it and a lot of rust on the outside. It is the wrong vehicle for the job. It is the wrong vehicle for the district, unfortunately. Again, we will get back to actually asking the board to dispose of it, meaning selling it at a later time. Right now, we're looking at purchasing a 2018 Colorado. That's with extended cab. It is ultimately the smallest truck that you can find. This is what we have out here, the Chevy Colorados, except that this time we're looking at an extended cab because there is just always this equipment that the folks have to put behind the seat, locators, etc. So this is pretty much the cheapest version of what we want, four-wheel drive, light-duty truck with some decent guarantees. So we're saving a little bit of money by picking the vehicle up ourselves, and that's why we're only asking for the issuance of the attached purchase order in the amount of $26,693,000.
So moved.
Second.
My goodness, so this is a minor one. In your title, you say 2018, and in the narrative, you say 2019. So I personally don't care, but then you go back to 2018, so Do you know which year model you're doing?
It's a 2019.
Okay. We have 2018 and it's
Does it should specify, I thought it was a 2019, and it should specify, does it?
Well, I can give you the, I think we're willing to allow you to figure that one out on your own, but I was just curious. Roll call vote, please.
Okay. Director Slater Carter,
Aye.
Director Boyd, Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Harvey,
Could you get one for me? Aye.
and Director Hebert.
They have a car that was only 25,000 miles on it, you might be able to get that one.
Yeah, I mean,
As I just a quick side note, my previous employment, we bought a Mack truck and it was supposed to be 1 year and it was listed when on the title was a year earlier and they had to buy it back.
Yes. Yeah, so we might want to be, okay. Next item, review of the Department of Water Resources reclassification of the Half Moon Bay Terrace to high priority.
Yeah, okay, so this is quite a surprise that's coming in. The Half Moon Bay Terrace is ultimately the aquifer, as Department of Water Resources defines it, that pretty much starts at the airport and goes far beyond the south of Half Moon Bay, which of course is not one aquifer, but they just categorized all these sub-aquifers into just one spot, one area on their big map. This was so far categorized as low priority under the new CASTM state law. And now it is reclassified as high priority. What this means is before we weren't really under the pressure to do much. However, now this new law requires that we form with all stakeholder agencies a groundwater sustainability agency within 2 years and a groundwater monitoring plan within 5 years. I have to say, when this law was implemented, the initial agencies had around 4 years to implement the GSAs, and that was really tough to achieve for them. We are now really under pressure to get this done within 2 years. Same was the groundwater monitoring plan, had a longer time span. There was simply some much more lead time available. There was grant funds available for that folks could tap into, for example, the groundwater monitoring plan work. Those grant funds dried up by now. So this comes really at an inconvenient time for us. This is something where we have a chance to comment on within 60 days. So what we're doing right now is we're working with Balanced Hydrologic and SRT on assessing what this means. We're also working intensely with County Health Department. There is initial webinars. Yesterday was a webinar. Next week is a meeting at the county center with the stakeholders about this. So everybody is up in arms, particularly the county, who has to suffer that all 3 basins in the county were reclassified, and they have to figure out how to get all the 50 cities together and work on this, who don't really have an interest and an understanding about this. So right now our biggest question really is this something that we support or oppose? Initially, I would want to say that this district has a high interest in ensuring that our aquifers are healthy, and that this is something that we've been doing on our own through Balance, quite a lot of monitoring efforts, and so on. However, I think it's pretty realistic to say that we would be the small fish in the pond, and yet we have a large district, air surface-wise, really, and also are actually a big user in this aquifer. So There is right now still a chance to oppose it. The county indicated they're working towards opposing this, so this is really a question that we're having. Is this something that we want to support? We clearly support GSA's groundwater monitoring plans. George Irving trying to get a groundwater monitoring plan implemented before me. However, what is a bit irritating is the gun on the chest that we currently feel. So at this time, this is for information only, and we're just learning about this and bring this back to the board once we know more. What I wanted to say, it's, whatever it is, it's gonna cost money.
So
It's
I would
a
just,
costly process.
I think I would sum up what you just said in terms of we support monitoring. In fact, we've been doing it. We're a leader in this. We have a problem with the timing, and it doesn't make sense to expand beyond a single basin or a single or the basins under a single jurisdiction. So I think I see room there for us to oppose on the details, but support in the main.
Yes, for example, there was actually a process that just was finalized that allowed GSAs to redraw the boundaries. You know, this is something that is unclear to me if we have that chance right now as well. Good question.
All right, so stay tuned on that. Sounds like. The item that we voted to add to the agenda tonight
Yes.
is review and possible action concerning sewer main line relocation and related agreement. This is Sunshine Valley Road project. Comments up to you?
Yes, so the property owner went through all the process, the process with San Mateo County and Montara for the construction of a single-family residence. There is a conflict between the sewer line that is running through their property. So our sewer main is on their private property. And the house, they simply want to build, there's no room for the house unless they move the sewer line. That was conditioned to our permit. That was clearly stated from the beginning and talked about from the beginning on. We now have a design for the relocation that was reviewed by Pippin, and we're right now asking to add, we're asking to add this, as an emergency item due to, construction timing demands and the related financing. That was stated by Dave earlier. We're asking the board to authorize the general manager to sign and implement the mainline extension agreement.
This action will be taken by motion approving and authorizing the agreement for construction and acquisition of sewer main extension.
Okay. Any discussion from the board? Can we have a motion?
Oh, wait, I'm not clear, who pays for this?
The applicant.
Okay. Yeah, there's no applicant. Okay.
Thanks for doing the work. It looks like this could have been a very complicated thing, and got it pretty well resolved, so.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
I'll second. Cut off my preamble.
Yes, good
Sorry,
work.
I know, you just gotta,
That-
put the kill on that.
That's great, Bruce.
Yeah.
So are we now gonna let Tracy do her job?
Yes.
Director Slater Carter.
I'm going to abstain because I haven't seen any of the documentation. It's not available as an addition to the agenda.
All right, Lon,
Okay.
go ahead.
I think it was sent out.
She hasn't had a chance to review it.
Okay.
Okay. Director Boyd,
Aye.
Director Wilson,
Aye.
Director Harvey,
Aye.
Director Huber.
All right, so we have 4 and 1 extension. All right, number 6 is review and possible action concerning cancellation of several meetings and scheduling of alternative meetings. Comments?
Yeah, so we know that the June 7 meeting isn't working for this district. That's why we're scheduled this May 31 special meeting tonight. So I'm not going to be available on June 21. the July 5 meeting is awfully close to July 4, so that's why we're asking that we put our heads together and figure out how we're gonna go through the next month meeting-wise, and when do we want to meet at the beginning of July. We definitely need a meeting at the beginning of July to approve the budget and set the master fee schedule.
So the question is, do we need a meeting in June? That's the first question. Is there anything we need to do in June that requires a meeting?
I think if we're agreeing that the Finance Committee is going with us through the budget process,
Yeah.
then we should be fine with a meeting at the beginning of July. Dave, this is possible to adopt the budget in
It is,
July.
yeah, the option of retroactive, and then you frequently have the amendments to the master fee schedule too, somewhere around that time.
So the question is, the next Thursday is July 12th. I'm certainly available on July 12th. How's the rest of you? Schedule looks for that week,
July 12th?
Thursday.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be,
You're supposed to be helping us in the process.
I know. There is, well,
I think I may have a conflict.
may not have a
You
conflict.
guys are not helping.
I'm supposed to be attending an aqua session in Roseville.
That's a good start, right?
Well,
The 11th would work,
you mean the Wednesday?
yes.
I guess there's nothing holy about Thursday. I could do it. Ken, how about the rest of you?
Wednesday, the 11th works for me.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Yeah.
It works for me, so July 11th.
July 11th, we have a unanimous group of folks saying, yes, we should take it before anyone changes their mind.
7:30 PM, right?
7:30 on July 11th will be our next meeting.
Well, what time? 7:30.
7:30. Maybe for Scott, we should move it up to 5. What do you think? Oh, Steve.
There'd be less traffic.
Drive really fast. Like super, when you went back in time to save Lois Lane.
June 21st, you're before that, after that, that's right in the middle.
Right, I'm coming back on,
Lois Lane passed away.
Okay,
let me see.
and I won't be available from the 17th to the 21st. of
Okay.
June.
So I'm gonna let you guys take that offline, because that's the finance committee.
Yeah.
So you and
Okay.
Catherine and Tony can manage that. Okay,
So where are we?
July 11th.
July
Yes, 7:30.
14th
PM.
through 20th.
Oh, I thought AM.
Okay,
I can do AM.
so that roughly corresponds to what
Yeah, some traffic wise, you're probably right. All right, reports, and I will hope that all those who give reports will be efficient, no names mentioned. And we'll start with the SAM report.
I don't think there's anything more to talk about.
No, I agree. Catherine, anything in addition to what Scott said?
Nope,
Wow. Mid-Coast Council?
nothing.
Wow. CSDA report?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Attorney's report?
Next.
Nix? Oh. Director's reports? None. And Clemens?
Auch nichts.
Okay. With that in mind, we are gonna go to closed session. I think the camera's done. We appreciate the attendance, and we'll close for 5 minutes to allow